I'm Laura Vinroot Poole, and this is What We Wore. Ivan Shaw is the former photography director at Vogue for over 20 years and an amazing orator of the stories and excitement of Vogue at the height of the magazine. He shares a wealth of wisdom from his career at Condé Nast, where he's now the corporate photography director of Condé Nast and visuals editor of the World of Interiors. You're nice to do this
Please, thank you.
I love seeing you after we saw each other in person, but I'm happy to ask you there were more things I wanted to ask when we were at
Sure.
the Mint that I'd like to ask. But let's start. I know the answer to this, but tell me again, where are you from?
Well, I'm from a few places. I was born in New Jersey, but I spent most of my childhood in Connecticut, primarily Stamford, Connecticut, to southeastern Connecticut. My mom still lives there, so I kind of feel that's home.
And how did you come to be interested in fashion or in photography?
Yeah, well,
Which came first?
photography definitely came first, and I was kind of obsessed with photography books when I was a kid. I had my parents' life book of pictures,
I
which
had
I
that.
looked through. Yeah,
Oh
I
my
mean,
God.
it's
And can I ask you a question about this?
of
Do you
course.
still have it?
I lost my parents' copy somewhere. They lost it or
Yeah.
I lost it. And then I went and bought another copy. And it was so powerful for me to look at it again, like 30 years since I had looked at it before,
Yeah.
because I remembered every picture and how much it had impacted my understanding of photography. And one of the most amazing things was one of the pictures I remembered most was a Don McCullin picture from the Troubles in Ireland of soldiers
Huh.
running through the streets of Belfast. And I actually got to meet Don McCullin and he sat in my office.
Wow.
One of the great moments of my career, Don McCullin, one of the greatest photojournalists of all time, was sitting in my office and we were chatting and I was like the guy from the book, like I got to meet him
That's
and like talk to
unbelievable.
him and it was unbelievable. So
Oh,
fashion comes a little bit later on, but
Ivan, I had that same experience. My grandparents had it, and I don't know if they were different. I mean, I don't think they
no,
were different, but there may have been different versions of it. But one thing that I really remember was, well, two parts of it. One was Verushka
yeah,
coming out of water in Greece, right? She had this really cool bikini
yes,
on with like gold jewelry.
Franco Rubertelli, I think, yeah,
And the other was that what was the first
or
bikini?
Henry
I can't
Clark,
remember her. Rudy
Rudy
Gernreich.
Genreich, Rudy
Genreich.
Gernreich, right,
Yeah, that there was a photograph of that too in it. And I just remember,
yeah,
I mean, I was obsessed with the whole book, but particularly the
totally.
fashion when I look back on it.
I bet. I mean, Verusha, I think was Henry Clark. I have to go back and look. I think maybe it was Henry Clark. Um, and the Peggy Moffat
Yes,
with Rudy Gernreich, which I think is William Claxton. I want to say William Claxton, but I know the pictures, but I think it's William
so
Claxton.
crazy.
I know. And the other book was the Ernst Haas book called In America,
Mm.
which is just, he was a phenomenal photojournalist. And when I started taking pictures, I wanted to take pictures that looked like Ernst Haas.
Huh.
And his daughter Victoria is a friend of mine, and
Wow.
so I told her when I met her, I said, when somebody introduced us, I said, I used to be a photographer, and I want to take pictures like your dad. And
Oh,
there was a picture of Lexington Avenue after a snowstorm, which is my one of my favorite Ernst Haas pictures. And I always say that picture is the reason why I moved to New York City
wow.
because it was so, I mean, there were other reasons too, but it was so
Yeah.
fantastic and so glamorous. And I'd like in this really, not in an obvious way, but just in this, it was so mystical. And I just thought, I want to be there. Like, that's where I want to live and work and have my life.
Did you have a camera at that time and play
I
around with
got a
photography?
camera, funnily enough, when I was about 14. My brother actually got a camera, I think from my grandparents. He didn't use it, and I picked it up and started taking pictures. And my first trip is actually fashion related. We were living in, I think, Connecticut. We were maybe in Connecticut or Bedford Hills, New York. We were there for 1 year, and maybe Connecticut when I first got to Connecticut. And we went into New York for the day. We had we had tickets to a tennis match, like some kind of men's tennis tournament. And I brought the camera, but we also went to Paul Stewart because whenever we went to New York, my dad would buy his clothes. My mom loved it too, but my dad would buy his suits and his coats at Paul Stewart.
Yeah.
And I remember going to Paul Stewart and I had the camera around my neck and we went to the tennis match and I took pictures, color transparency pictures at the tennis match. And those were the first pictures I ever took, like as a photographer. Like,
Wow.
yeah,
I love that. And also
yeah,
that comes around too because Anna's such a tennis player.
I know, serious.
You can definitely talk to her about that.
Yeah.
Um, Tell me a little bit. We've talked before, but tell me a little bit about your dad and what he did and how that played into this too.
Yeah, he passed a couple of years ago. My dad was a kid from the Bronx, really smart. He was a actually, you'll appreciate this. He was a textile salesman in the
Hmm.
60s, and he and his business partner were one of the first people to sell cotton jeans.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think if I have that right, the story right, because it's denim originally, obviously, but I think they were
Huh.
selling cotton jeans. But they were very early in the jeans business in the early 60s. And I think it was cotton jeans. Um, and the guy he was working for also owned a newspaper in Northern Connecticut. And he said, look, do you want to go to Northern Connecticut and be this advertising manager for this newspaper called the Journal Enquirer, which was a daily in Manchester, Connecticut. I mean, really, I mean, a wonderful place, but kind of the middle of nowhere for somebody from New York. My dad always jokes that he went into a diner like when he first got there and he ordered a bagel and the waitress said, "What's a bagel?" You know, so this is a kid from the Bronx, you know. And my mom went with, of course, we went with him, right? And my mother always said when she got there, she had, you know, they had lived outside of New York City. She didn't know anyone. There wasn't much to do. It was a quiet town. So she would kind of go to the museum and do things, and she would take me with her. And she remembers doing that. I guess, I don't know, maybe I was young and I wasn't really in school. My brother was already in grade school. And so I would start to do stuff with her and go to museums and go to stores when she'd go shopping,
Huh.
which are two things that become pivotal in my
Right,
life,
right,
which is kind
exactly.
of crazy.
So you spent a lot of time around the newspaper and understood at a
Totally.
young age that that was a career, that was something that
Well,
one could
kind
do.
of and kind of not. Yes. I mean, my dad was a real he was a salesman, but he was a true newspaper guy. He was a he became publisher of a paper, and we would go to the presses at night, and writers and photographers from the newspaper would have dinner. They'd come over for dinner. And so I was definitely in it. I don't think I was like, I want to have a career in newspapers, but I certainly had the bug. And when I look what happened to me in the thing, what I was drawn to, it makes perfect sense, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I was more a magazine guy, but my dad ended up he became a newspaper publisher. It's kind of a long story, which I won't get too into, but he ended up in about 1986 starting his own newspaper company. And weirdly, I had this weird thing. I didn't know where I wanted to go to college. I just didn't really, I wasn't that focused. But somebody had said Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts would be a good place. We went to like a college career counselor because I didn't really, my guidance counselor was like, you know, hopeless. Like he was like a bodybuilder at a big public high school. He was like, yeah, you should go to college. And it didn't go much farther than that. And but we went to this college guy and he was like, well, you know, you should, maybe Clark University. And I think I had kind of was on my radar anyway. So I applied and I was waitlisted, but I got in. But weirdly, my father wanted to build a company and he was in the process of buying a newspaper called Business Worcester,
Huh.
which was a biweekly business newspaper in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is where Clark is located.
About
So
textiles or about just
no,
general?
no, it's
Because
just
textiles
business
were there.
general.
Huh.
Oh, no, no. So it's my dad's in the newspaper business. He buys I think it was weekly or monthly newspaper called Intercorp, which was like a business news journal, kind of like a
Huh.
small scale business week. And then he has his eye on this small company, one of which is Business Worcester, which is a biweekly business magazine for business newspaper for Worcester County, and then the Providence Business Journal, which is like its sister publication. And so the funny thing, and the reason why I bring it up is that he was like, well, why don't we go up and see Clark? And I am trying to close this deal anyway. So we drove to Worcester because he was in the process of closing the deal. And we sort of we pulled up at the campus and we walked around. He's like, what do you think? I was like, it looks really nice. He's like, yeah, it looks really nice. And, you know, you have to understand, my dad was a guy who went to night school at City College of New York for 13 years and worked all day. So
Yeah,
he
wow.
didn't have, you know, he was a kid from the
Yeah,
Bronx. He lived with his parents. He had no under sense, and not in a bad way, but he just
yeah,
didn't like the idea of going to college and this whole experience, this
yeah.
360 did not exist. He had just gone to night school. My mother had gone to college, but was a dancer. So she wasn't really that interested in it, you know, like she wasn't super into it. My grandfather was an academic, but so it wasn't like I was like really focused on, you know, the college experience. I just kind of walked on the campus and I was like, it looks fine.
Yeah, it's
It's
fine.
nice. There's trees, there's brick buildings. And that night we had dinner with the guy he was going to eventually buy the
Right.
business from. So,
Yeah.
but that
That
got me to Worcester and got me into photography because I had been working at a restaurant when I was in school, at high school, and making money, and I wanted to work. And he said, go down to the newspaper, they'll find a job for you. And I got there and the publisher said, what are you interested in? I said, well, you know, I'm interested in photography. And he said, do you have a portfolio? And I was like, of course not. I had like a pack of pictures. but they put me to work in the darkroom just as a helper.
Wow.
And I was working for a young photographer named Christopher Navin, who was a 24-year-old guy who was brilliant.
Huh.
And I started working for him, just helping him in the darkroom. And he taught me photography. And we're still friends
Wow.
today, 40 years later.
That's amazing. And were you studying, what did you study in school?
Art history.
Art,
Yeah.
great.
And so and philosophy. I was super into philosophy.
Huh.
But for whatever, I went into an art criticism. I took, I had this thing at college where you're supposed to take like the introductory class, then you take the next level. And I ignored all that. I would never call myself a rebel, but I seemed to ignore that. And I would just pick classes that I was interested in one. So I
Yeah.
took a modern European philosophy class, which was an advanced class. I walk in the first day, the guy's a really tough professor. He said, if this is your first philosophy class, get out. And I ignored him. And I ended up getting, I think, an A or a B in that class. I got super into it. And then I walked into an art criticism class, which again was an
Huh.
advanced class, which I didn't belong into. And I just completely clicked like immediately.
Wow.
Like I was like, oh yeah. So I was asking questions of the professor, and I'm like, yeah. And she came up. She's like a history student. I was like, no. And it clicked. It
It's
really
so
clicked.
funny too. I mean, it's so rare. I don't know, it sounds like you had a really, really engaged and enriching college experience.
Well, I here's the thing. I think yes, I did. If I if I look back, the only regret, because I worked every day and I got so into photography, I didn't really spend a lot of time with people,
Yeah.
socializing, hanging out. And to be blunt, I didn't have a lot of friends in college. I was very
Yeah.
much a loner. I was a loner in high school too. But I was not really social. I didn't have much of a social life. I had a few friends, but and a part of that was, I think, just who I am, but also because every day I would get up, I'd go to work, then I'd run back, I'd go to class, and I'd run back to work. And I had this kind of alternate life
Yeah.
at the newspaper.
Yeah.
That now looking back, I'm really glad that happened because it shaped the rest of my career. When I look back, I feel so fortunate that I found that thing that I was kind of
Yeah.
good at, that I really liked. The part of me is a little sad that I didn't get to like really be 20 and
Hang
21
out in the
years old
south
the
of
same
France. Yeah.
ways.
And so
But
tell me, so from Clark, how did you get you had your first internship at Vanity Fair?
so it's a good story. All I knew is I wanted to go to New York and become a photographer, right? And I got into NYU graduate school in photography, and I was like, okay, now my parents will pay for it, and I get to New York. That's all I care. I just want to get to New York and be a photographer. It wasn't too expensive. It was a program. It was a big deal. So I got to New York and I was in this program, which was really wild because it was this far out fine art photography program. Of course, me being me, I didn't do any real research and find the right program. I just was like, I want to go to New York. NYU is a good school. If I can get it, there's a program. I just signed up and I
Yeah.
got in. And so I get there and it's super far out, right? Like my advisor is like this way out artist from the East Village, and like there was like, there was a lot of women. There was really at the time of Francesca Woodman was super
Yeah.
important. Everything was super political. So
Wow.
it was kind of like, it's terrible, but my joke was that like in class, all the women were doing nude self-portraits, right? So I used to joke it was like the ultimate high school fantasy. You got to see every girl in class naked. But it literally was like that. And my favorite one was that one of the women did a picture of herself naked on a bike, and so they put it. She puts it up, and the teacher says, "What does everybody think?" And I said, "Nice bike. I really like the bike." And everybody cracked up, and she came up after me, and she was like, "I really actually appreciated that because I was kind of just joking on the picture, and you were the one person to take it seriously." But anyway. I got invited to a dinner in the East Village with a friend of mine from Clark. He said, we're going to meet at the corner of I don't know, First Street and Avenue A or something. So I'm standing at this corner and this other guy is standing there. And I said, hey, are you Brian's friend? He said, yeah. He said, my name is Howard. Turns out he was an editorial assistant at Vanity Fair. And he said, I sit right next to the assistant to the photography director. And I said, wow, because I'm looking for an internship. And at that time, Vanity Fair was kind of my favorite magazine. It was
Yeah.
really like at one of its peaks. It was phenomenal, just phenomenal. And he said, if you give me your resume, I'll give it to her. She's really nice. She's my friend. Sit right next to her. He was working for Michael Caruso, who was an editor at Vanity Fair, who had been the editor of the Village Voice. So one of
Mm.
these like really fantastic New York magazine editors. It was the old days. I went up to 350 Madison Avenue with my resume and I gave it to him. And I got an interview with the photography director, Elizabeth Biondi, who was super tough. But I got through it and she sent me to Susan White, the photo editor, and they gave me the internship
Wow.
and at Vanity Fair photo department. And that starts February 1991.
Uh-huh.
And it's really amazing because I look back and like how fast I got to New York in September of 1990. I got the internship in February of 1991, and then I was hired back as the freelance assistant in the photo department in July of 1992.
Wow.
So like from September 1992, like my whole life changed.
Yeah. And did you finish the graduate program?
So this is the other funny story. I was going to the school and I was really struggling and I was so immersed in Vanity Fair and everything that was happening that I decided at one point it was time for me to register for the next semester, right? And I get on the train at Grand Central and I get off. I'm supposed to go to like Union Square or Astor Place. And I get off at 23rd Street and I'm like, I can't do this. I can't go back to school. All I want to do is work at Vanity Fair. I just don't care. And I get back to work and I call my parents and I'm like, don't be mad at me, but I just can't do this anymore. Like I found my calling. I just can't do this. And they're like, okay, we're kind of upset because there's some money on this, but like, we really want you to get a master's degree. But like, my parents are amazing, you know, and they were like, okay, we're not, you know, we're going to honor that. Like, you don't want to go to school. We're not going to force you to go to school.
Yeah.
And so I quit. And then, all along, my parents were like, you know, you didn't have much left to go. And then I finally decided about a year and a half later, you know what, I should really finish my master's. And the brilliant thing was I made an appointment with my advisor, and he's kind of this great guy, amazing guy, but he was just kind of like, and I think he did kind of forgotten that I had disappeared for like a year. Like, I don't think it was like really a big deal for him. It was East Village, it was 90, whatever, it's cool. And I came back, I said, you know, I just want to take some classes. What do I need to do to finish? And he was great. And he kind of was like, okay, you take these classes, you got to do a final project and we'll get you through it. I did. And I got my master's. So I have a master's degree from NYU, which is great. You know, it was funny, but he was super cool about it.
I love that. And so from Vanity Fair, you went from intern to working
right. So intern to being a freelance photo assistant in the photo department. And my boss at the time, Susan White, who was wonderful, who's the photo editor of Vanity Fair, has huge impact on my career. She knew I wanted a staff position. And so, because, you know, benefits and all that kind of stuff. And there was this opening for the assistant to Charles Churchward, who was the design director, brilliant design director of Vanity Fair. And she kind of put my name in for it. You know, God bless her. She kind of put me up for the job. But it was also this weird thing where I went in one day. It's weird how things happen. We were doing a story on Guy Bourdin, the famous French fashion photographer of the 70s. And they said, go into Charlie's office. He has all these old French Vogues. You got to go through it and find some stories or something like that. And I was sitting in his office with him, going through all of these old French Vogues from the 70s, which he had in his office because he was obsessed, you know? Yeah. And we just clicked. We got on really well. We started talking about photography. I'm like, wow, like this guy totally gets it. And he's like amazing. And in my mind, I'm like, this is the guy. I want to work for this guy. And I got that job in May of 1994. And then in November of 1994, they made him design director of Vogue.
Right.
And he called me into his office and he said, I can bring one person with me to Vogue. Do you want to come with me? And I was like, sure.
Absolutely.
You know, yeah, right.
So tell me about that first day at Vogue.
How did you feel? It was very funny. I mean, there were a couple of things. One, I remember distinctly, we both dressed up, shirts and ties, like old school, you know, shirt ties. And I remember them calling me into Anna's office and introducing myself to Anna and said hello. And she got up and we shook hands. And that was my first time meeting Anna. And it was funny because when I got there, I was kind of confused. I couldn't understand why you would do a story on belts. I couldn't understand why you would do a story on nails. You know, I kind of understood like a big fashion story, but like, why do they do a story on belts? How do you do a story on belts? How do you do a story on nails? So I was a little confused because I had looked at Vogue, but not, you know, through the lens of somebody who's really like buying or shopping or like, you know, I just was like, wow, that picture's amazing. Those pictures are amazing. But I didn't understand the process or the fashion point of view. But I thought to myself, oh, look, I'm going to give it 2 years because this is good opportunity and I'll just try to make it work for 2 years and then I'll see. And then, so my joke for like the next 20 years is I was just giving it another 2 years, you know? And so I had that job. I started, in November 94. And then in the beginning of 1996, the photo editor at the time left and I got the job in April of 1996. I became photo editor of Vogue. I was 26 years old.
Did you know exactly what that entailed before you got the job?
Yeah. I figured. I knew I was over my head for
Yeah.
sure. I was a little over my head, you know. I think there's there's that Navy SEALs thing about being 30% over your head. Like they always say that you can go 30% beyond your limit. Beyond that, you're probably gonna like die, right? You're gonna get in trouble. So like if you're like underwater, you can go 30% longer than you think you can go, right? Your comfort zone. I was definitely at like 30, 40% the first year or two of that job.
And was Charles had that job before?
No, he was an art director.
Art director. Okay. Had he ever had it? So I mean,
No,
did you ask him like what do I actually do
no.
here?
I
Or,
mean, he was always an art director. He was never a photo editor,
yeah.
but he knew it. He'd worked with a lot of photo editors. He was tough. So it
Tough
was sink or
about tough
swim.
about like quality or
Yeah,
details or yeah, all of
they
it.
set
Just
the bar
everything
really
just yeah,
high.
really high.
And, they set the bar really high. And like you
How
just had to hit it. And otherwise you were done.
how did your life transform when you became the photo editor?
He was completely immersive. I mean, when I first got to New York, I didn't have much of a life. I had one or two friends. I it was totally immersive. I mean, it was so intense to get up and go and do that all day. And first of all, the magazine was doing really well. I had so much work to do. There were
Yeah.
so many shoots. There was so
I mean,
much that needed to be done.
it was a thick
It was a
magazine.
thick magazine. Every issue was 400 pages.
Yeah,
September was
unreal.
800 pages. We were working constantly, had an enormous amount of responsibility. And I was also working in like this alternative universe of like all of these amazing fashion women and some of the greatest fashion editors of all time. I mean, you got to
Yeah.
remember, you go down the hall when I first got there, you had Grace Coddington, Phyllis Posnick, Camilla Nickerson, Brana
Tawny.
Wolf. Tawny comes a couple years later,
Uh,
then Tawny, Paul Cavaco. I mean,
yeah.
like, it was crazy. Like, Candy
And did
Press
you know
Price
who they
accessories.
were, but just from
I
being
didn't.
there? Yeah,
I
right.
did once I got, I
Yeah.
didn't know the
Well,
fashion world. Didn't really have any exposure to the fashion world. So I didn't really know who they were. And they weren't famous
yeah,
yet, too.
right.
They were Vogue editors and they were really known in the industry, but they're not famous. They weren't famous the way they are now.
Exactly.
Um, but I look back and then in Anna Winter and like, and that was the thing also, and even going back to Vanity Fair, the level of people, I thought when I was a photographer, it would take me 30 years to get to that level. And suddenly when I got to Vanity Fair, originally Annie Leibovitz was walking down the hall, Herb Ritts, Helmut Newton, Michel Comte, some of the best photographers ever working there. And the writers too, and I was thinking about it recently, sort of prepping for this, that, John Richardson was writing art,
Yeah.
Picasso's biographer. Dominic Dunn was working at Vanity
Yeah.
Fair. Christopher Hitchens, Frank DeFord,
Nancy Jo Sales, is
Nancy
that
Just
that sound?
Sales, Maureen
Yeah.
Orth. I mean,
Yeah.
amazing writers. And then it's the
Yeah.
same thing at Vogue. It was like, again, Annie had just started she starts to work in the mid 90s, but Irving Penn and Helmut Newton are contributing regularly to the magazine. And then David Bailey and
That's
all the others and
crazy.
Arthur Elgort and Herb Ritts and Annie, of course. Then Stephen Meisel is at his height
And
during
you're
that time.
and a little of your job, so you're editing, you have the
I'm
primary relationship with these photographers.
Well, it's more complicated than that. I'm more a producer. The edits
Mhm.
actually happen in the art department. So
Yep.
photo editor was actually a misnomer. I was not
Right.
editing film. I was producing shoots.
Yep.
So I had this really great thing. So for the center of the magazine, the well, we had all
Mhm.
these major photographers. And so I would do the bookings, but the fashion editors would work with them. So if Grace Coddington was working with Stephen Meisel on a story, they didn't really need my input.
Right.
I wasn't going to add anything to that conversation. I was just make sure, like, I would talk to Stephen's agent, and I would say, okay, we're going to do it this week. Grace, are you okay on the week of the 19th? Yes, she's fine. And then I was kind of done until the shoot was done, and then I would pick up and handle all the post-production.
How do you think your life would have been different if you hadn't worked at Vogue?
I think about that sometimes. I don't know. I don't think I would have made it as a photographer. And
Mm.
I say that because I think I was pretty talented as a portrait photographer. I was okay. But I don't know if I would have had the confidence to be a freelancer my whole life. I think I was much happier in a thing.
Yeah.
So I think I
In a
probably
team.
would have in a team. You have to have a real confidence to make it as a freelancer and a will and a fearlessness that I
Yeah.
don't think I had, especially because going back, my dad lost his business in 1990 with the S&L crisis.
Hmm.
And so And that was very difficult for me. It was very difficult for my family. And I worked for him at the time. So everybody
Mhm.
at work turned on him. It
Yeah.
was really ugly. Paychecks didn't come through. It got really ugly. And so I went through that with him. And that was very scary and a real life lesson. And so I think there was a part of me that did not want an
Yeah.
unstable financial life. It wanted stability. And Condé Nast not only brought me glamour and all these other amazing things, but it brought this tremendous sense of stability.
Yeah.
Um, so I think I would have found something else stabilizing. Now, I don't know what that
Yeah.
would have, maybe in the art world, probably in the art world. I think there was enough of my brain. I don't think I ever would have made it like in an investment bank or something like that. I think there's this part of me is like, wow, I wish I had gone to work for Goldman Sachs in 1990 because, like,
Oh, yeah, exactly.
I'd be calling in from my yacht right now. So there's a part I have friends who chose that path, and I'm like, okay, they have really nice lives, they do all right. So there's a part of me, oh, what if I had, but I clearly was not wired for that.
So now you are the corporate photography director at Condé Nast and the
Yeah,
visuals editor of World of Interiors.
yeah.
What do you love about this new role?
I love both.
Yeah.
So, and I have this weird perfect mix. So, as corporate photography director, I oversee the U.S. archive for Condé Nast, and I work with our sales teams and our editorial teams on kind of telling the story of Condé Nast and our brands, Vogue, Vanity Fair, The New Yorker, Glamour, all these amazing
Yeah.
GQ, all these amazing brands. So I have this wonderful kind of look back at the history of photography, the history of the company. I love the company. It's a huge part of who I am. I've spent most of my life now at
Yeah.
Condé Nast. And the flip side is I'm the visuals editor at the World of Interiors, and that happened about 3 years ago when Hamish Bowles came on as editor in chief. Um, he needed a little help for the first couple of issues because what happens, you have regime change when a new editor in chief, because
Right.
everybody left, right? And everybody had been at World of Interiors with Rupert for like 30 years. He left, they all left. That's what happens. And he was like, he needed some help to get through. So Anna called me in. It was kind of a funny story, but she called me in and was like, can you help Hamish get through the first issue or two? And I was like, of course. And then he came in and the two of us. And then I started doing it and I was like, wow, this is amazing. Because
Yeah.
funnily enough, after I left Vogue, which was 2016, I kind of said to myself, and I said to Lisa, like, I don't ever want to be a photo editor again. Like I was photo editor of Vogue. It's never going to be any better. Like I just
Yeah.
need to move on.
It was a
And like
moment.
it'll never be any better than this. But in the back of my mind, I was like, yeah, but the one magazine I would love to do is the World of Interiors.
And talk to me a little bit about the archive. How big is it and what are the years that it spans?
Yeah, so we, have about 1.2 million images.
Wow.
We have over a million images. It really starts with, let's say, the very first issue of Vogue, which we have December 17th, 1892.
Wow.
And up until we still have digital files, we kind of stopped for the most part in 1978, generally speaking, copyright laws changed. So for the most part, things started to be returned to the photographers. We had some photographers, Irving Penn, Patrick de Marchelier, Arthur Elgort, which we had special agreements with them. So we continued to receive material into the 90s and early 2000s. After that, everything becomes digital. So it's not really something that sits in the physical archive anymore.
What's been your biggest personal or professional struggle to date?
I think so much has happened, and then people talk about legacy media. I mean, people started talking about, print is dead 15 years ago, which
Yeah.
was not true. But it was painful to go through that process of be feeling like you're on top of the world and working at a magazine is the center of the universe and you're on top of the world and all those cliches. And to seeing it start to kind of uh, deteriorate in terms of the
Yeah.
business environment because the landscape changed. Like, right, it's not anybody's fault. It's just the world changed.
Yeah.
Social media, and so
Did you
that's been
feel
kind
it
of
early?
painful.
Like, did you understand that early?
I saw it, and I am definitely a worrier by nature. Anyone will tell you. And I think honestly, I probably overreacted to it because of what I had gone through with my dad and watching him
Yeah.
lose his
Yeah.
business. I was hypersensitive to that kind of thing happening. And so I think when I first started to feel that the floor was starting to cave in, um, I was probably overreacted, kind of like,
Mm.
oh my God. And I think a lot of people did. And the truth is, I think there will be magazines around for a long
Yeah.
time. And we're doing a lot of things now digitally that I think we're brilliant at, and
Yeah.
globally. We're doing a lot of really interesting things at Condé Nast. And we have amazing people here. Um, but I think that was really hard. Like I'm a guy who struggles with confidence for sure. I'm not like a super confident person. Some people are. It's just not my DNA. I always feel like I have to prove myself. Um, so I probably would benefit from being more confident, but I just it's who I am. Um,
What
yeah.
did you once believe about yourself that's no longer true?
I always thought that I was kind of the loner, and I kind of was, and I always thought I'm really kind of an outsider. I know everybody says that, and.
The little I know you, even I do know you're a great friend. I mean,
Thank you.
to people. So I don't think you're a loner at all.
Okay. Maybe I'm not.
People
Maybe I'm
adore you,
better.
and I mean, I think you're such a you're
Well,
such a deep, close friend.
I
My,
tell you, thank you for saying that. And I feel a lot of the same things for you. Um, One of the things I think happened that I became more social as I got older.
mm,
I really value my friendships and I really value supporting people
yeah,
and helping my friends.
yeah.
Like I really, really value that. And even now I'm writing for worldofinteriors.com and I love writing for worldofinteriors.com. And the thing I like writing about most is when I get to write about my friends. And I've had
Mm,
that happen a couple of times recently. Or I've got Ruth Runberg, who's
yeah.
from Charlotte. We just featured one of her Charlotte candles.
Aw.
We had every month we do editors picks.
Yeah.
And they were like, okay, it's Valentine's Day. And I was like, oh, Queen Charlotte would be amazing, a pink one. And so I emailed Ruth and she was like, totally. And I'm like, I love that. Like, I
Yeah.
love supporting my friends and
And
doing
to make the
stuff.
world small.
Yeah, and it's like good stuff. Like it
Yeah.
deserves to be there. And I've written stories about friends of mine and about their homes and things like that. And I love that.
If you could give advice to a photographer at the start of his or her career, what would it be?
Yeah, I'll give the piece of advice that I got, which was the hardest question a photographer has to answer is what to photograph.
Mm,
It's the most basic one. This guy who I worked for who was brilliant, who I assisted a tiny bit, and he said, that's the hardest question, what to photograph. So the advice I would give is try to pick a lane in a way, like to say, well, I love fashion, or I love interior design, or I really like sports, or I love journalism and politics, and really get into that lane, know who's out there, know who's doing the work, and look at that work and say, okay, well, that's the bar. These are the best people. This would do. So I think that's the thing is try to kind of figure yourself out because there are so many photographers. There's so much picture taking now. I mean, it's endless. You
yeah.
have to find something that you can bring to it that is unique. And that the only thing that you can bring to photography is yourself,
Is you. Yeah.
right? Because everything else has been done. There's so much been done.
Right. I love that.
Yeah.
Great advice. Last question. What did
Okay.
you wear to prom in Connecticut?
Oh my gosh. Well, you got to understand it was 1986.
Okay.
So I wore a classic black tux, but I wore it with the red tie, the red
Nice.
cummerbund. Yes,
Ah,
yes,
okay.
yes.
Okay. And shoes, anything Converse or
No, oh my God, I would never do that. It was all rental. It was a rent-a-tux, rent-a-shoes. I'm sure they were shiny.
did your date wear red?
Well, this is a crazy story. And I never told this story, but I actually took two waitresses that I worked with to my prom. And I know
I love it. It was two.
this is the
Okay.
craziest story. So, as I said, I was certainly not a popular guy in high school. I had some friends, but I didn't have a girlfriend or anything like that.
Okay.
But I love to work, and I was working at this restaurant called Rory's. And I was making, again, it was part like my whole thing. The thing I did in high school is the same thing I did in college, which I was kind of going to school, but I was really working because I love to work.
Yeah.
And I was doing really well at work. I was getting paid in cash. It was like a yuppie bar. It was 1986. Things were booming. The restaurant was booming. The guy who
Crushing it.
owned it was a real kind of like this very good looking, super successful guy. We had all these beautiful waitresses. I was making like tons of cash. I'd make like $180 cash because the place was just booming. And I had this woman, this girl who was a friend of mine. She used to ride to school with me. And she said to me, like, do you want to go to the prom with me? Right. And I was like, that would be amazing because I never go for it. I was like, yeah, I'll go to the prom with you. I was so excited. I'm going to go to the senior prom. And then she started dating some guy who went to another school and like a classic high school thing, right?
Yeah.
And she didn't know what to do because he was upset that she was going to the prom with me. But she was, she was like 16 to 17. She was terrified she wasn't going to confront me or say anything like that. So she got one of her friends to kind of come to me like, Amy's really, she doesn't know what to do. And the guy's giving up good. So I was like, it's okay. We don't have to go to the prom, whatever. So I told her one morning on school, I was like, don't worry, we don't have to go to the prom. And she was so relieved. She's like, thank you, thank you. But then I was like, what? I don't know why. Oh, so what happened is I go to work at this restaurant where I'm working like Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights, right? And the waitresses were like my big sisters, right? And they were all like 30 years old and they were very beautiful. And they said, oh, like what's going on? I said, oh, I'm not going to my prom. Like this girl bailed on me and da, da, da. And one of the waitresses said, she was like 30 and she was like, I'll go to your prom with you. And then her roommate, who lived with her, said, I'll go too. We'll both go with you to your
You
prom.
showed up with like two
So
hot...
I had to buy prom bids. I had to buy I had to sneakily buy 2 prom bids, right? But it gets worse. It gets worse. It gets worse. So I just set the whole thing up. I bring both corsages. They're like, va-voom, like they're, and we go to the prom and we get there and I'm sitting there with these 2 30-year-old waitresses, like women, and like everybody's like, what the F is going on here? And we get up to get our picture taken, and I'll never forget, the photographer's like trying to figure out how to pose both of us, 3 of us. And he goes, wow, like hormones these days, like he just does not know what the hell's going on. And he takes the pictures, which I still have.
Oh my God.
And then we just left and went to dinner at a restaurant. We just ditched. Which was terrible. The interesting thing, and it was a little bit of a life lesson for me. So it was very funny and crazy. And the kind of thing at 17, you're like, oh, it's a great idea. But no, But what was interesting is that the female friends, the girls at that point, 17, who I was friends with, a few of them who I was friends with at school, particularly Amy, my friend, were like furious with me about it.
Oh, wow.
They were really angry and they basically never really talked to me again because it was like
they thought you were like making a mockery of the prom?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was like their big night to look beautiful.
Huh.
And it was really, I didn't understand it. It took me years to kind of unpack it.
Yeah.
But I realized they were mad. They were kind of like, what the hell? Like, what's wrong? And they wouldn't like talk to me and they were mad.
Wow.
And I thought it took me a long, you don't get something like that when you're 18. But years after I thought about it, and I thought, this was their big night to look beautiful, to be dressed up, and I kind of made a mockery of it. And then there was 3 empty seats at some table, which is not cool. And it was a life. I mean, it was just, I don't know, it was a crazy thing. But the interesting thing, it was really a life lesson because I thought, you have to be careful about, your impact on people. You can do something that you think is funny and just happens, but like you can really hurt someone's feelings.
Wow.
Especially, you think it's funny, right? So I really try to be like sensitive to, think about how this is going to impact someone else.
What a great story.
Yeah. And it was really profound because I think about, first of all, I think it was amazing because these women, the courage and also like the love that they kind of showed me that like I was really their friend. I mean, to be a 30-year-old woman and go to get dressed up and go to a high school prom to show up for me.
Yeah. I love that.
To show up and to have no fear and be like, I don't care, we're going. And it was Lori and Cindy. Those were their names.
Lori and Cindy, I love it.
Lori and Cindy. And one was blonde and the other was brunette.
Oh, wow.
And they were super pretty and like, dude, and like,
that's a great story.
Prom. And so it really, and then those few women who were friends of mine, they never really talked to me again after, which is sad. It kind of bums me out. And I didn't mean to hurt them.
Yeah.
But, it's the kind of thing that does make me think like, okay, really think about your actions here and how they're going to affect people. But anyway, this is 1986.
Great story.
Very dynasty, right? Yeah.
I mean, I can see it.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Welcome.
Thanks for spending the afternoon with me. And what wonderful, just so much advice and interesting things. And I could listen for hours and hours on them. Thank you.
I'm a huge fan of yours and of Capital. So this was a delight and an honor. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Evan.